Let's take a closer look at Argentina's economy with Ramiro Tosi. He's the former Undersecretary of Finance for Argentina. Welcome to the show.
Good night, Gerald.
Hello there.
Thank you for having your show.
Oh, absolutely. We have a lot to unpack here, Ramiro, because President Javier Milei says he intends to eliminate Argentina's budget deficit entirely in 2025, and alongside that, a rebound in growth and a slowdown in inflation. All very ambitious, to say the least. How achievable?
Well, as you mentioned, it's quite ambitious because, as you know, Argentina is already under a severe adjustment, taking into consideration the latest figure as of July this year. Argentina ran a primary surplus of 1.4% of the GDP, and for next year, the budget that Javier Milei presented yesterday at the Congress stipulates a primary deficit of a near a similar amount, 1.5% of GDP. The problems being is that part of the fiscal adjustment of this year has to do with erosion in the payments to the retired people and public workers, something that the next year it won't be possible because as inflation is coming down, you won't have this exceptional, let's say, gain in terms of fiscal space to commit to that adjustment. That's why most of the burden of next year adjustment will come from provinces, from public works, and also from transfer to the provinces. In a year in which you have midterm elections, there will be a lot of political conflict, especially with governors.
That's really interesting there. Because all these measures, they don't just sound like belt tightening, Ramiro. This is financial shock therapy. And the big question here is, can the average Argentine stomach any more of these measures? I mean, an estimated 60% of the people already live in poverty.
Yes, precisely. That's the question of how much tolerance people have to this fiscal adjustment, because as you show to the audience in the previous report, most of the people was, let's say, in the belief that parts of the fiscal adjustments will be on part of what Javier Milei called the caste, so maybe the political spectrum, but people have just realized that the most part of the fiscal adjustments comes from them, because you have the erosion on their incomes, you have the increase in the tariff, so people are really struggling months on a month to come up with all these increases that it's really a difficult political and economic environment.
And what is this doing for the popularity of President Milei?
Well, that's an interesting question, because according to the people who convey this type of polls or surveys, Javier Milei has an approval rate of almost 45%, but if you take these amounts from April on, when most of these, let's say, tightening bill measures have been applied, there is a decreasing trend in this approval rate. Although it's, let's say, in a good shape now, if these tightening bill measures stands on time, well, this approval rate will eventually decline, and it will create political interferences and political problems in the Congress as well.
So a new poll of economic analysts out on Monday forecast that Argentina will extend its recession in the second quarter of this year. Reining in spending and inflation seems to be taking a toll on economic activity. So how does Milei's plan achieve what he wants? Like if he's going to keep cutting spending, how is this going to affect growth? And he's expecting a rebound in growth next year.
Well, that's precisely what of the most, let's say, academic or professional economists warns here in Argentina, because every time you have a big fiscal adjustment, that implies that you will be affecting the economic activity. So, for example, this year you have, as I mentioned before, a primary surplus of 1.4% of the GDP, but the economy will contract at a pace of at least 3.5 or 3.8% of the GDP. So for next year, having a similar fiscal adjustment, the government is expecting, let's say, a growth rate of 5% that looks very optimistic, because besides some sectors that are running really well, for example, oil and gas, and mineral companies, the rest of the economy hasn't recovered yet. So it's quite difficult to forecast that type of reaction or that type of the resume of growth with this combination of fiscal adjustment plus an erosion in the incomes of most of the people.
So we saw Milei there, doing something no precedent's really done, because he took over the economy minister's job and, presented the speech. The question I have here is, only half of Congress turned out for his budget speech. Does this spell, troubled waters for the budget approval?
Well, that definitely was happened because, as you mentioned, it was this type of unprecedented show in which the president of the nation addressed the Congress just to present a bill that normally is in charge of the Minister of Finance and later is, let's say, discussed in special commissions of the Congress. So that's why most of the opposition leaders consider this like, let's say, a TV show more than a formal, let's say, representation. Because, and in fact, if you see, let's say, the speech, which lasts almost 40 minutes, most of the content was a kind of a political message, and he didn't even, let's say, deliver any figure that is embedded in the budget bill.
Ramiro, we have just, about 20 seconds left, but I really have to come back to that one point earlier. You talked about social tolerance. At what point do people say enough is enough and frustration boils over? Do you see Milei remaining in power long enough to see his vision through?
Well, I think that as time progresses, if the government didn't react or doesn't react to the, let's say, the people mood, it will be very difficult, especially during the second semester, to keep on these fiscal tightening measures, definitely.